Hello, welcome to Matters of DeCorum. I'm Scott Corum. This is what matters to me. Refined the eye patch a little bit, still don't actually need it, but it prevents me from seeing a perfectly good picture with this eye and a very, very foggy, cloudy mess with this one, which does occasionally cause headaches. Next week, Tuesday next week, this eye gets fixed, and we'll see how things go from that. So maybe one more of these with the eye patch, unless you folks tell me you really like the eye patch, in which case I might make it a thing moving forward. Who knows? Maybe Uncle Drac needs a solid eye. When I was 12, a friend of mine at my school introduced me to Dungeons and Dragons. He'd found a newspaper article on it. The St. Louis Post had done this write up, and their write up was mostly on people LARPing, although we didn't have a term for it back then. I don't want to go through the calculations of what year I was 12. But he had a grasp on the basics of the tabletop version, and amongst this grasp was dungeons. Take your graph paper and you etch out pathways and doorways and traps, and here's an orc, here's a troll or a troglodyte, and you just build them out until they're this structure that fills your sheet of graph paper. And everyone in my class, well, most of the guys in my class, latched onto this and started drawing dungeons. There were some amazingly creative people in that class, and they went hard on it for about 2-3 weeks, and then the next thing came along, because we didn't have a much bigger grasp of D&D back then. It was, you draw dungeons, and most people let it go after a couple of weeks. My mom got me a desk blotter, 2.5 feet by 2 feet, and it was a desk blotter that was filled with a giant pad of graph paper. That, just 100 sheets of graph paper at that size, and I could make my dungeons huge. It continued on the next page, huge. And I did. I spent a year or more just drawing these huge, improbable structures and pathways and mazes, and designing traps that had I didn't have any hint of the setting. I didn't know how this fit into their bigger world. I didn't understand the characters had to run through this, or the dice mechanics that would eventually be involved. I had no idea of any of that. I was drawing mazes. I was drawing dungeons, and it kept me busy. So it kept me busy. So I wasn't bothering my mom while she was sewing. So everything was fine. As I picked up more information about D&D, as I started to actually play it years later, got into high school, and when I started high school, I got into a group. Those dungeons stopped. They didn't resemble the stuff that was in the books I was reading, because those dungeons were slightly more controlled, more governed by the story. They had a little bit more context to them. But looking back on them, they still weren't great. It wasn't until I hit college that I got my hands on a copy of GURPS Fantasy, 2nd edition, and read a sidebar that would inform my dungeon design for years to come. A sidebar on dungeon ecology. I think it was Lloyd Blankenship who wrote it. Not 100% sure. Dungeon ecology. Yes, you have a 10-foot by 10-foot room with a chest in it being guarded by an orc. Does the orc eat? Where does the orc eat? How long is the orc on shift? Where does it sleep? Is there another orc that takes over for it when the first orc is, you know, on break, sleeping, eating? How many shifts does your dungeon have? Do you have a 24/7 dungeon? Where do the monsters stay? Where do they eat? Where do they excrete? Do they keep themselves clean? Is there a water source? How does the food come into the dungeon? How does the waste leave the dungeon? If the waste leaves the dungeon, how does the dungeon function with the things that are in the dungeon? It made me start thinking of these dungeons as a functional space, as a place where, yeah, you're telling a story that involves the adventure, but you're also laying out this place where things can live and work and function, and where an organization of these things can work together to make things happen or to fulfill the function of the dungeon, whether it is protecting something at the far end or guarding a pathway to something or just drawing in adventurers to kill them for fun and sport. And that changed how I did dungeons for a very long time. The dungeons that I wrote past that have living spaces and mess halls and bunks. There are oubliettes for any number of different functions. And then once I have that infrastructure laid in, once I know how the things in the dungeon survive living in the dungeon, then I tell the rest of the story about what people are there at the dungeon to do. Here's where the thing you're looking for is, here's how to get to it, and here's how all the stuff that works there lives. And that is not a bad approach. That's given me some very good dungeons, some very attractive ways to spend the afternoon running around killing stuff. And that is a very functional approach for a certain value of dungeon. Dungeon's an odd term to use. It's Dungeons and Dragons, so it's dungeons, which are big labyrinthine underground strands. If they're not by the classical definition, a dungeon. Dictionary.com. Dungeon, noun. 1. A strong, dark prison or cell, usually underground, as in a medieval castle. 2. The keep or stronghold of a castle, as in donjon. Historically, dungeons were small. They weren't any bigger than the castle that they were in, and usually much smaller. A few cells at most. They were places to keep prisoners, criminal prisoners, political prisoners, what have you, and often to do terrible things to them. Dungeons were often one-way trips. You could absolutely keep someone in a dungeon until they were too weak to resist you, and then pitch them down an oubliette, and you're done. A big hole in the ground in which all kinds of waste goes. Not only what comes out after you've consumed food a few hours before, but trash, garbage, political prisoners, things of all kinds that just, it's down there in a big deep hole and you never intend to see it again. We're done. Dungeons were traditionally not big things. We don't really mean dungeons when we say dungeons and Dungeons and Dragons. We mean labyrinths. We mean a pathway along which adventure can happen. Usually inside. An interior pathway, or not even necessarily an underground pathway, an interior pathway through which adventures can happen. A pathway that confuses, befuddles, and serves the plot. You're building something much more like the Minotaur of Crete than a traditional dungeon or castle maker. So we understand that we're already breaking away from that definition of dungeon. The functional dungeon, the dungeon with an ecology, that's a wonderful approach. But once you've got that approach down, once you've designed that, once you're there, let's play with the concepts a little bit and see what else we can fit into that mold of a pathway for adventure. A few years ago, a wonderful group of artists put out, I might be able to find the resource, I don't know if it's still there, put out a set of maps, beautifully drawn maps, of the inside of the Tarrasque, the Dungeon and Dragons lore's equivalent to Godzilla. Massive and unstoppable and horrifically destructive, and its insides make a very compelling dungeon. No one saw that organizations could function effectively within it, or that saw to its ecology. You can't really set up living spaces and a mess hall, but it's a dungeon nonetheless. It is a labyrinthine passage through the inside of a monster, with a lot of threats and problems down there. The flora and fauna of the stomach and intestines alone are enough to wipe out most adventuring parties, and not to mention all the other issues that happen inside a monster. That's an amazing dungeon. I wish I'd have thought of it first. That's kind of incredible. And it does the job. It's a labyrinthine path full of perils and switchbacks and confusion. And there's stuff to find that a Tarrasque. Can you imagine the magical components you could find hunting around inside the Tarrasque? There's an entire campaign based on that too. The Salt and the Wounds campaign, which I kickstarted. Amazing. I think you can still find it out there. I've run some of that for the layer action. Just incredible stuff. And I'm thinking combining the two, going to the Salt and Wound campaign where the Tarrasque is imprisoned and being mined for resources, but then you have to go inside the Tarrasque and deal with stuff in there. Just an amazing opportunity. That's not your traditional dungeon, but it absolutely works. From a certain perspective, the Starship Enterprise is a perfectly acceptable dungeon. I had the blueprints for the original, the NCC 1701, before they started assigning letters to it. I guess you call it the A now. I had a full set of the blueprints when I was young. And that's a map. That's a map with a lot of pathways and switchbacks and dangerous things. A D&D group, not having no idea what they were doing or what they were seeing, stuck on the Enterprise. One of those bubble episodes where all the action takes place on board, and none of the crew are there, or maybe very few of the crew are. Maybe it's the original Enterprise, but somehow wibbly wobbly, timey wimey, the Borg are on board. And now your 10th level adventuring group doesn't seem so powerful. And you've got problems. And that'd be amazing. That'd be absolutely amazing, especially when they succumb to that desire to push all the buttons, as every adventuring group eventually does. And then things just go wacky. Your adventuring group is tasked to go to the astral plane and bring back a psionicist for crimes committed against humanity, or whatever race is sending you in to deal with this. And because on the astral plane, thought becomes form, and that's a powerful psionicist, so their thoughts become form more than most, and they have collapsed into a canatotic state because they are beset by all the issues and all their guilt, and that has formed a structure around them. Now you've got to navigate and deal with all of their mental issues given form, and you're in a phantasmal maze that you cannot get back out until you have worked your way through all of their issues, gotten to them, and brought them out. There's no ecology involved there. You are walking around in insanity. Nothing that you do as the dungeon master at that point in time becomes, that wouldn't make sense in a dungeon. You're in a place that's pure insanity. A unicorn with tentacles instead of wings. Well, I guess that'd be an alicorn with tentacles instead of wings. Sure, that can happen. I don't know what that represents that psionicist did, but wow, he's got some issues. You might want to help him out with that. Now, maybe you found a way to cure some forms of insanity. Maybe by defeating his phantasmal issues, you've actually helped him cope with those issues in his own mind. Maybe bring him out, and he's cured, or at least on a pathway towards healing, where maybe they don't prosecute him. Maybe they take him in for treatment and see to it that he's no longer sick and he can find his own way to pay recompense for what he's done. And that's an adventure. I'd run that. What you do is you find a path that guides people to what you want them to get to, and you let them follow it. And there's a problem that adventurers don't want to follow the path. Okay, players don't want to follow the path, which is fine. That's still the path's the adventure. Want to find their way around around it? Oh, well, let's see if we can not deal with this trap. Let's see if we can find a way around this trap. Let's see if we can not deal with those monsters. Let's see what the way around those monsters are. Can we fool them? Can we do something? Can we not do this dungeon? Because there's going to be people in there who are going to want to do the whole dungeon step by step, square by square, and people who just aren't. I'm going to give you the concept that I came up with for handling non-traditional dungeon design and dealing with players who are always looking for their end around. This is a little crazy. I might do this at some point in time in the future. Just a spoiler warning for those who might be playing with me. Oh God, I've got so many campaigns lined up. I've got at least 3 campaigns with a layer action that I'm planned ahead, and every so often, last week I got a message from Candace with everyone else having had this really great idea, but the only person who could run it was me. And when they pitched it to me, I'm like, yeah, I think I'm the only person who can run that, and I will absolutely do it because it sounds amazing. But that happens every so often, so I get this docket. I don't know when I'm going to run this. I have no idea when and the Warriors Wednesday campaign that we've got going now, they just hit 2nd level, and it's going to be another couple of weeks before they hit 3rd. And then we're going on as far as we can with this thing, so it's going to take a while because the progression slows down as they go on. So no telling when I'll get to this. If I'm looking for a stellar example of a set of pathways that are going to entice and confuse a group of people on them, that is going to take them past certain specific features I want them to experience, but also gives them perhaps an opportunity to use their cleverness to get around these things, but still keep it interesting. I'm going to run these people through Disneyland, or some version of Disney. I've used elements of Disneyland in several games. I've made up at least 4 versions of It's a Small World. But let's expand this concept, and let's look at why Disneyland is a really good study in dungeon design. On the surface, Disneyland is this big fun place to go, and you go, there's all this stuff all over the place, and you just run around and you have fun, and then you leave exhausted, perhaps carrying an even more exhausted child, because they wore themselves out more than you ever could. But when you start to look at the structure and function of it, people study Disneyland just to learn the tactics that good old Walt came up with for moving people from place to place and keeping them interested and involved. Disneyland is a case study in human traffic management, not human trafficking, but the science of moving people from one place to another. The map of Disneyland is designed to funnel people from a very large group, that being everyone outside, down a main channel with services so that they can be drawn in and aided in moving further in. Perhaps taking advantage of one of the additional means of travel, you can absolutely walk it, or there's a trolley car you can take back and forth, or if you're feeling fanciful, the little old time bus or the horse and carriage that'll take you further in to where you have options to go to more than one different type of location. Main Strip Inn, branching off to smaller exhibits, all of which are going to catch your eye, all of which have clear visible. Even if you don't have a map to Disneyland, you can find your way around. You can just follow the paths towards the stuff that looks interesting, going past things that are meant to catch you and hold you for a while and drain you of money until you get to the thing that you meant to go for, where you are channeled for a while through a queue that takes you past things fascinating, things that are going to capture your attention and hold you and get you involved in the ride you're about to go on. Then there's the ride. It is, compared to the rest of the experience, relatively short, but it is exciting and it is fun, and it gets you through this thing, and then it kicks you out through a gift shop where you are meant to lose more of your precious money, and then back out into the main drag where you can go to the next ride past other points of interest that are designed to drag out your money. As I'm walking in my head down Disney, as I've been many times, go down Main Street, I turn that first right past the Carnation Dairy. Great buffet, by the way, and cafeteria style. And I'm in space. I'm in Tomorrowland. And there's Space Mountain, Biggest Day, and there's the Buzz Lightyear stuff. I walked past the rocket pods. And any of these, I've got to walk past at least 2 vendors for churros or popcorn or sodas. And churros have that cinnamon smell, and the popcorn just gets up your nose and with the salt and the butter and makes you want some. And it's hot out and you're walking, and there's this ice cold sodas that would just be so good. And you can get a souvenir cup that they'll refill for a pittance of what you would pay for one of the regular bottles of soda. So why not? And then you've got a souvenir that you can put up on your shelf with all your other souvenir cups. And then you get to the ride and you're moving back and forth in the line for a little while, but there's little pictures and maybe a dancing animatronic to keep you involved and tell you stuff about the ride, or you're hearing the environmentals of the fuels being loaded in and T-10 to lift off. And it's all very engaging and exciting. Again, you're moving fast and there's wind in your hair and you're diving and ducking, and you go on Star Tours and oh my gosh, you're flying through the Death Star and almost crash landing while the little droid doesn't know what's going on, but he's helping you out as much as he can. And then you get out and oh my gosh, here's my first, I bought my first edition of the West End D6 Star Wars role-playing game, my player's guide, my Dungeon Masters, and my DMG in the gift shop after Star Tours. Right there, all the Star Wars figures and lightsabers, and way before Galaxy's Edge was ever there. And yeah, money just left my pocket, hand over fist. And then you get back out and everything's wonderful, and there's Space Mountain right there, and there's a nice place to sit, and there's a fun little thing for the kids to do, this giant marble ball that's just held up by a thin layer of water, but it moves freely, and a bunch of kids can get on that and get cooled down and get a little wet and move the ball around and make it rotate different directions and get it spinning. And all of this, it's a wonderful time. It's wonderful. There's a little routine going on over there where they're choosing Jedi, and Darth Vader himself shows up in the costume and all the stormtroopers, and I'm engaged, I'm drawn in, and I'm moving in that direction. And what's over there? Food. It's right in front of a big food place. So I'm going to stop and, wow, man, I've been through a couple of rides and I had that soda and I was good with the popcorn, but oh man, some chicken strips are really good right now. And the chicken strips in Tomorrowland are kind of epic. So yeah, how do I translate this into D&D? Very easily. My dungeon design funnels me in. There's a large structure that calls my attention. You walk in and, well, there's a main entrance. There's just a big thing. And maybe there's tapestries or mosaics that tell me a little bit about what this dungeon's here. Give me some lore, give me some stuff, get me interested. And somewhere in there, there is the artifact. Whatever the artifact is, but oh, the artifact's going to be amazing. It's going to give you powers or give someone else powers. It's going to finish your quest. But it's right there. You see it in mosaic form. Is that's what we're here for. And then you go down the path. Maybe there's a number of different paths. Maybe there's a riddle that suggests what path you go down. Or maybe, just maybe, it's all the same path. You can just start it along different points. How do you find out? Well, if you don't have a map, you can just explore. You can just explore, take a path and go. And as you go down, every so often, there's these little things that entice you. They're probably traps. That little alcove with maybe a little bit of extra lore, or that looks like a little bit of treasure that might have gotten left out. Or over there, maybe is that a hurt person on the ground? Do I hear crying? Do they need help? Is that someone we hadn't heard about? Can we go get them? And all of those. Okay, give me a deck save because all of those are traps. It just entices you over there and you're on this pathway anyway. And oh, look, there's a thing. And it's designed to take away a little bit of your hit points and just keep you on your toes, stretch you out a little bit. It's not like everyone can get to the artifact. Maybe you got to be pure of heart and resist all the temptations, or maybe you don't get the proper key unless you go and help the person who's a dummy of some sort or an automaton that is just designed to look like someone who's terribly badly hurt, and they congratulate you and give you the key, or they laugh at you with sharp teeth and a boulder drops on your head. And depending, maybe a little bit of both, depending on how you approach it or if you disarm it. But these are the little distractions off to the side. These are the little things to draw your attention and start chipping away at your hit points. And then there's the big chamber where, this looks big. This looks important. That we get a little bit of, we're funneled into this chamber and there's a fight. Here is a fight, or either a really big puzzle or a really big fight, or maybe both. Maybe it's a puzzle you have to solve while you're fighting. Maybe there's a bunch of skeletons, or some of the orcs on call they get the ring in their barracks and gear up. And while you have been reading what this chamber is all about and the riddle of the artifact, the orcs have been gearing up and grabbing their stuff and having one last cup of coffee. And then they come charging and yelling at you and you have a fight and it's exciting and everyone gets their stuff. Yeah, you might lose some hit points, but you're at the same time, this is what the adventuring party does. They get in there and they beat things up and take things down. And we hope if it is orcs, we hope they have good medical. Someone's taking care of them afterwards, but that's not your problem. You're the adventuring party. You're trying to get to the artifact. You go get to the artifact. And so you finish that and you leave the chamber. There's only one chamber, only one way out. And of course, trap. Because why would you not take a few more hit points right there? Well, man, we just had a fight and everything's good. And we got some XP and got some of the stuff off the orcs. And that one had coffee. I don't know why, but it's good coffee. And then you come down out this 10-foot corridor out and spikes, boulder drops, trapdoor, something to take away a few more hit points. Lather, rinse, repeat for a while until you have gone through enough of these chambers. Alternate fight and puzzle. Or you have a puzzle that fights you. Maybe there's a mechanical puzzle or something that's been magically animated, full of knives and swords and whips that you gotta solve while you beat it up. Oh, that'd be awesome. That's a fight. until you get to the chamber with the artifact. And you gotta beat stuff up to get the artifact, or find a, or do a leap of faith, some kind of test, something. If you've done it right by this point in time, people are, just as you're about to leave Disneyland, and you are leaving partially because you're tired and partially because you're poor, because that budget you set aside, you exceeded it about 5 minutes ago, and it's time to leave. In the dungeon, you're almost out of heals. If someone doesn't get a long rest, you're not going to be able to go another 10 feet. You're exhausted. You're starting to, there's not enough healing in the group for people to keep themselves topped off. You are worn down. The barbarian is out of rages. Your wizard is out of spell slots. You are just about done. You get to the artifact, and you push yourself hard to do whatever challenge is in the artifact room, and you get the artifact. You win the dungeon. You get the artifact. Now you can go and do whatever it is you need to do with the artifact, but you've got the thing. And there's a couple traps on the way out. Because why not? Because Disneyland's biggest shop is on Main Street. You're going to pass it going in. You're going to pass it going out. And because of how traffic usually flows, you're more likely to be walking directly in front of the shops on Main Street. And yeah, can we get one more souvenir? Can we get one more Toy Daddy? And you're going to lose a little bit more on the way out, but you're going to win because you get out. And that's playing it straight. That's, everyone wants to do the dungeon straight and do room by room. And yes, we've done this. What about those other folks? What about those people who would like to bypass everything, who like to find the way around? The people who don't necessarily want to avoid having fun, but whose fun is in finding ways to circumvent the planned adventure. You know who you are. Here's another feature of Disneyland that I'm really fond of. And it's a behind the scenes thing, or more appropriately, it's a backstage thing. Disneyland has a backstage. There is a infrastructure to Disneyland under Disneyland. Tunnels and areas under there where they actually do the work of keeping the park operating. Where you don't see people making deliveries of food and goods to the restaurants and stores. That's being done underground. You don't see maintenance crews moving around to go fix stuff because they're moving underground. You don't see the maintenance happening because most of the parts that need to be maintained are underground. There is a whole dungeon under Disneyland. So you have this dungeon you've gone into. You're trying to find the artifact, and there's all these traps, and you start wondering, does someone come through and reset those traps? Where did those orcs come from? This coffee was hot. Where did they heat up the coffee? And maybe you start poking around, and you find a hidden door. A really well hidden door. Something that's a little bit more hidden than features of the other traps. Things that, that trap, I could tell that trap's there. That's a DC 12 to find the trap, not a problem. That hidden door was a DC 18. You were lucky to find it. What's it lead to? It leads to the dungeon's infrastructure. It leads to all the passages that link the stuff in the dungeon, so the gnomes can go and reset the traps or repair them if they get damaged, so that the orcs can come in at exactly the right point in the right place to engage in combat, where all the puzzles have all the actual clockwork mechanics that make them work, so that people are only really destroying the Pell with the weapons on it, and not the stuff that would be really expensive or difficult to replace, so that they can reset the dungeon. There's might be more than one artifact, or they might have a series of artifacts that they set up there. But there's a back route. And finding the back route isn't end-arounding the dungeon. It's not, oh, well, now we're not going to have any fun because there's nothing back there. Oh, there's lots of stuff back there. Because that's where that's where security is going to be. Well, you might have been dealing with all these orcs all along, but that's a troll. That is a troll with his squad of other trolls, a couple of ogre magi, just to make sure the mages stay in line, and they're going to ask you to leave the back area. And you can argue about it, but that's going to come to blows. And now the dungeon really hates you. Now you're not doing what the dungeon wanted you to do. You are breaking the dungeon rules, and the dungeon's going to respond accordingly. And yeah, there's not going to be any traps. Why would they trap the area where they work? So you're going to bypass all the traps, but security is going to be on your backside from the moment you enter that area until the moment you leave, hopefully with the artifact. Or you might just get locked up because there's cells somewhere at Disneyland where they can keep people who, until the police can show up to pick them up. Disneyland security is somewhat ruthless in some ways. And yeah, you might end up just getting locked up and having to do a jailbreak adventure. Well, they took all your lockpicks. You don't have any of your tools, but you might be able to work something out, giving that a disadvantage and hope, because it's a real high DC, they really don't want people getting out of here. You cause too much damage, you kill too many of their personnel, you start breaking things that are really expensive to fix. Maybe the manager comes out. You don't want to meet the dungeon manager. Dungeon manager is something that there's probably a dragon in an office someplace. He settles his glasses on his nose and, we need to have a discussion about your attitude towards our facility. And either a conversation happens or there's fire, or maybe both. I don't know how your group would handle it. Your mileage may vary. But there's a big fight, and maybe you have the artifact and now you own a dungeon, and now you need to deal with maintaining it because you've killed the staff. I'd run that. And probably going to at some point in time. Dungeons are structures with rules. And there are rules for making dungeons, rules for how they operate things. And I encourage you to step outside those boxes. Find something that is atypical and run that as a dungeon. Someone's insides, or everyone got shrunk down really tiny so they could fight this curse that's flowing in someone's blood. And now you're doing Fantastic Voyage in someone's circulatory system. And it's flexible. It doesn't have to conform to anything you have ever seen before. And I encourage it not to. Do something wild. Do something crazy. Dungeons shouldn't be these stodgy structures that you can always predict what's going to happen. Oh, there's going to be a trap. Oh, this is where the cells are. Oh, here's the prisoners. One of them's going to be undead. Everything you have ever done in a dungeon, give yourself the challenge of making a dungeon that does nothing you've ever done before in a dungeon. I give myself that challenge once a year to do something absolutely new, completely different, unlike anything I've ever seen before, and that has served me well. I encourage, if you're running a game or planning a game, got a campaign in your head, turn something on its head. The dungeon's a really good place to start. Well, thanks for following me along in this particular rant. If you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't enjoy the video, give me a thumbs down. Feedback is feedback. Do you like the solid eye? Because it's kind of growing on me. Let me know if you like the solid eye, things you'd like to hear me talk about, things you'd like to hear me cover, questions you'd like to hear me answer, your own experiences with atypical dungeons, or typical dungeons that were handled in an atypical manner. Leave me a comment below. I will love getting your comment. You'll love leaving me a comment. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, why not? My channel is awesome. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And when you do that, you might want to hit the little notification bell so you're alerted when my videos become available. If you would like to contribute to the channel in a more substantial manner, I invite you to hit me up on my Patreon page, www.patreon.com/ScottQuorum, and consider donating. Absolutely anything helps. Allows me to make better videos more often. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching. I'm Scott Quorum. This is what has mattered to me. I'll see you next time on the next Matters of DeCorum.